Justin, would love to just have you introduce yourself and maybe talk a bit about your journey from an investment banker to a hit producing artist to an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I guess before we get started, part of the reason I was excited to join you all today is Andy Bromberg and Ryan Breslow are really good friends of mine, and I know they're some of the OGs in the history of the club. So always fun to kind of come full circle. Andy really has been and was an incredible advisor to me in 2017 when I really started to dive in deeper, though I kind of was, separately involved in the space since 2014. 17 is when I started getting really active. So it's a pleasure to be here to chat with you all today. Obviously some of the brightest next minds to join the movement that we're all really excited about. But yeah, I guess to give a kind of brief history, I studied structured products and derivatives in school. I was really interested in applied mathematics, finance, and of course it kind of informed my ability to make music because music is inherently mathematical. I did play piano when I was younger, so I had some background and was really fascinated with the idea that you could produce really amazing sounds out of your laptop when the barrier to entry prior was really expensive to kind of go to a recording studio and get really quality sound. I was kind of a part of this era where software really started to produce high quality synthetic sounds. And it kind of gave, this new generation of bedroom producers a lot of power to make music on their own. And it was really fun to be a part of that first generation of music producers. And I was kind of doing that on the weekends while I was in college. I was in college at WashU in St. Louis, also where my co-founder went to school. And I ended up dropping out my junior year because the touring schedule started to pick up. I released some mashups on YouTube and things went viral and I got very lucky with my timing. And I'm always grateful to that moment in time. My economics professor actually encouraged me to leave. I was on luckily a full scholarship. So they let me keep it for 8 years. I left my junior year. But the funny story behind it all is that a lot of my friends in school ended up dropping out. One of my friends, David Maxwell, who was my freshman roommate, ended up being employee number 20 at Square and left his junior year. So I've always had ties to the tech world, even though I've been focused in music. Fast forward to, without going into the details of my music career too deeply, fast forward to 2014. The story is fun. I love to tell it, but I was in Mexico with the Winklevoss twins opening up for Avicii at a concert. And that's when I met the Winklevoss twins for the first time. And I played my set before Avicii went on, and Avicii was always a big hero of mine. So it was a really special moment. And I went to their table and they started they weren't even talking directly to me about Bitcoin. They were talking to just their other friend that was with them on spring break. And I just started asking a lot of questions, and they invited me to come stay at their place in LA during Grammy week, which was around that time, or I don't really exactly know. The time limit of events is kind of off, but sometime in 2014, I bought my first Bitcoin, was really excited about the idea of, just no counterparty transfers 24/7, 7 days a week, permissionless value transfer anywhere in the world, anytime. And this idea of banking the unbanked in the third world and in developing countries. Those things were just super fascinating to me. And so I believed in it and, bought some and put it away. Fast forward to 17, ETH started booming, and the idea of an application layer on top of a blockchain got me really excited about how that might apply to my industry, an industry that I, throughout my years never signed a major record deal because the terms were just so predatory. And as somebody who studied finance, it just, you'd look at these deals and they wouldn't make sense. They were obviously so far in favor of a record label. And so I knew I would face an uphill battle in remaining independent, but also knew it was probably a terrible idea to sign these deals. All of that kind of came to fruition with NFT stuff that we'll get to later in the story. But the idea of really owning and maintaining control of my music was really powerful. Having that background in finance and also looking at this ramp up of trend in streaming actually generating income. And one of the biggest misconceptions of the music business is that streams actually do generate real income, and music is quite a significant asset class. It's just that artists are disenfranchised because of the deals that they sign early, where they're giving up anywhere up to 86% of their income. And so they just don't see a lot of it, but it's there. It's actually happening. And so, that was always kind of something that I tried to champion throughout my career. Being an independent artist really does pay, should your songs achieve popularity. The hard part is, how do you get how do you make those songs popular? And that's where record labels have additional services that some artists might need, some artists might not. But in the age of the internet, right, we think that like the two primary reasons why labels exist are probably less relevant. It's capital for people to quit their day job and pursue their dream, and distribution. Both of those things can come from anywhere in 2022. At the time, they were heavily gated and blockaded from artists being able to source those two tools to build their careers elsewhere. And yeah, so these were all the things that when Ethereum came around, I just was immediately mind blown by the possibilities. And at the time, there was only one other artist, one other musician specifically, I should say, one other musician who was paying attention, and his name was RAC. I'm sure some of you are familiar with his music. And really, both of us for a really long time were the crazy kids of the music crew, the crazy crypto kids that believed in this stuff, and everyone in music just did not care at all for a very, very, very long time. And I basically started, actually consulting with Andy. I had this crazy idea and I'm trying to get through the story as quickly as possible here. In 2017, I had this idea to, I started seeing a lot of like music coins and streaming services, and I like really didn't believe in much of it. It didn't make sense architecturally from a music standpoint, even though all the kind of crypto speculators were like, oh, music, this is like going to be the music thing. The one that ended up outlasting all of them was the one that I chose to advise. Audius, I've been an advisor since day one for them, and they are obviously the leader in the streaming department. The one thing that I was excited about is like disintermediating other aspects of music, because streaming, as much as people think it's broken, it's sort of not. What's broken is that there's a massive value unlock opportunity on top of streaming. It's not necessarily that streaming needs to be fixed. It's that there's value that isn't being captured in music outside of streaming that I think, the possibilities of, any type of limited digital asset really helps unlock. But before we dive into that,
Justin, just to kind of like shine a light on that, are you thinking, on the one hand, you have revenue streams, that come from this like asset, but there's also utility that the music NFT unlocks, like whether that's like VIP concert tickets, like with NAS or something like that, whether that's like access to a community Discord or something. Is that what you're thinking?
Absolutely. And yeah. I'll double click on that at the end. And there's a lot to talk about there. That's really fun. I believe there's kind of like 5 principles in how LDAs really shape, or why we value limited music in general. Like, what are the actual reasons why that's exciting to human beings? I'll get there at the end of this, and that's the fun part. But yeah, in 2017, I had this crazy idea to basically create a music festival where the token represented a vote on the lineup, and anyone who held the token could share in the profits of the festival. Of course, that was a security, but at the time, that we started the idea, no one was talking about securities. Like, it wasn't even like a conversation as a risk factor in thinking about issuing a token. And so after I talked to some great lawyers, because of course, as an artist with a public reputation, I wasn't going to like dive into something without having great counsel. I learned really quickly that we couldn't do that idea. So we threw a festival with some NFTs instead. That was really, really fun and successful. We built a wallet with the Stellar Lumens team. We issued collectibles. This festival, we started working on it in 17, but it happened in 18. And it was a great success. People loved scanning QR codes and getting like these limited digital items in their festival apps that only a couple people had. One of the things that like really enlightened me to the possibilities of NFTs is if you scan the QR code that was on my phone at the festival, we gave you 50 like special Blau badges. This was back in 2018. And when I went around, like it was like a scavenger hunt to find me at the festival. When I went around, they were gone in like 5 seconds. Like, I had a security guard next to me, and like everyone wanted to scan this thing because there were only 50 of them. And it was just a little badge in your festival app that was at, the back end was built on Stellar. So that was kind of my first crypto experiment. Then we kind of entered the bear market in 18. I felt that the burn would be like, just the burn rate of a festival company is insane. I was able to return capital to my investors dollar for dollar, which was really, really great after we threw this event. And I was like, I'm just going to move on and continue being an artist and experiment with crypto some other time. Fast forward to COVID hits, of course, touring business is dead. Everyone in music is struggling pretty hard. Music was definitely one of the worst, not the worst hit, but it was pretty poorly hit business by COVID naturally. And I started just kind of re-experimenting with that passion that I had from 2018. all along the way, I should say, Fred Arizim is a really close friend of mine, one of the founders of Coinbase. And, I had talked to him a lot over the years, and he'd always been kind of an inspiration to me. So when I started to kind of experiment with NFTs again, he was a great guide, and of course ended up being the reason why I started Royal. And I'll get there in a second. But between summer of 2020 is when I started issuing NFTs. There were like some of the first music NFTs that were real songs. I should say there were music NFTs that predated some of mine, but they were like jingles and like kind of like experimental, stuff. So yeah, summer 2020, we started issuing audiovisual collectibles, and the first sale did $21,000. And I was just kind of like mind blown. Like, that is in many ways for a regular sized DJ about a little bit less than a standard performance fee, right? And like everyone's not performing because of COVID. So I dove really, really deep, and I started really thinking about like what that world would look like, what exclusive music ownership might look like, and continued to issue collectibles. And then exactly about a year ago, I built this crazy auction mechanic on my own website with a designer and a developer from a company that I invested in back in 2017. And we built this auction on my website. It was a ranked auction where basically with digital items, there can be many of them. So in order to capture the entire demand curve, you can basically say, okay, you capture everyone's willingness to pay and they get different rarities of something. But it's not like a standard auction where there's one physical item and there can only be one winner. You can have multiple winners and you can capture more of the demand curve. So we did this auction expecting to make $100,000, maybe a little bit less. And it generated, close to 12 million at $11.7 million. And that was exactly a year ago, a year and, a little bit less than a year ago. So after that happened, of course, the whole music business is calling and blowing up my phone. And I'm just kind of like, what do I do? Like, what's next here? Like, it's still mid-COVID. No one's making money in music. Everybody's looking for something. But I knew at the time that like collectibles wasn't the end all, right? Like it was just an experiment that happened to work out really well. And I started chatting with Fred about like what I thought the future of this stuff looked like. And instead of, thinking about like fungible shares of a song, which just, is more data-driven, mathematical, not that interesting. It doesn't kind of feed into the idea of collecting music, which was like natural human behavior back in the vinyl and CD era. Like your collection actually meant a lot for you. Now everyone has the same collection for $9.99 on their phone. So you kind of lose this idea of, taste and identity to this kind of streaming era that exists. And yet, the demand curve for music has always been flat. There are only 4 ways to show patronage for a musician: buying merch, paying for an iTunes license for 99 cents, paying for a subscription, or going to see a performance. But music generates so much more emotional value in people's lives than those 4 things. So how do you capture that? And my thesis was, after the auction, letting people buy music as art, because music is art, is something that was so obvious. And accessing music as an asset class was only, that access was only available to labels and private equity funds. And my best friend, who's now my co-founder, JD, had once said to me a long time ago, and he's repeated it, some of the best startups are ideas that, basically take something that rich people really, really like and make it more accessible. In this case, it's a particular asset class. Owning music is something that everyone is interested in, but it's very different to own a CD or an MP3 file than it is to actually have a stake in the success of a song. When you start thinking about that, right, the incentives become so aligned between an artist and a fan that they are now partners, as opposed to this one-way consumption demand curve model that like just doesn't produce or capture even close to the value that music creates in our lives. And so I was talking to Fred about this after I spoke at the Paradigm. I'm sure some of you know Paradigm is, Paradigm in A16 is year 2 of the biggest funds. I spoke at Paradigm's LP event with Dylan Fields, who I'm sure many of you know, just about like the future of NFTs. And I talked about, how I felt IP tied to NFTs would be kind of where things would move. And that was like last March or something like that. And Fred kind of called me after on a Sunday, and he was like, dude, I've just been thinking about what you said. And I was like, yeah, I think this is where it's going. I think maybe I want to incubate a company, or like be on the board, but I don't know if I want to be a founder. I'm not, really ready for that responsibility. And on that call, he said, you should do it. And here's why. If someone else did it 10 years from now and succeeded, how would you feel? And that got me. I was like, I have to be the one to do this. Because if it was somebody else and I didn't do it, I would regret it for the rest of my life, I'm sure. And that's when I called JD, who, obviously just had an exit with Open Door, public exit, and was doing really well, but was kind of bored, super smart, wanted to work on something new, was very lucky to get to, build something with a college best friend of mine who has like deep history in tech, as I'm sure some of you know JD or have heard of some of the things he's worked on. And we started Royal in May. And the idea was to let anyone own music with their favorite artists and actually have real IP ownership in it. Fast forward to today, product is really freaking complicated. We wanted to make it accessible to people, and I can answer questions about that. There's a lot of like back-end technical things that are fun to talk about, and we could talk about that in the question and answer session. But going back to Jeremy, your original kind of the one question you threw out there, why do people care to own music beyond the royalties themselves? And we have this really, really clear thesis where royalties themselves create base level perception of true ownership, right? Owning a collectible doesn't generate anything. It's, the value of it is kind of subjective, the way the value of art is subjective. But when there is a cash flow tied to something, it definitely creates a greater perception of this idea of ownership. And the etymology of the word ownership is quite interesting. Like ownership means having legal tender, control, or authority over. And you don't really have any legal participation in a collectible, right? You don't have any rights to do anything. And so with Royal, we were just really excited about this idea of giving fans participation. And then, how do we do that on a technical level? And why does that matter? And why it matters is, really the royalties themselves are interesting, and they apply really to an up and coming artist where any individual could basically be their own record label and like bet on a bunch of future musicians. And if one of them pops, it's kind of like a VC model where you as an individual might have good taste in music, and maybe that artist is the biggest artist today, but those royalties actually might be significant in the future. They won't be for a little while, but if that artist is Billie Eilish and you bet on Ocean Eyes, you'd be killing it right now, right? Yep. So creating an open market for that was really important to us. But beyond that, there's kind of innate pride in ownership that we see across the visual NFT space, where like it's a flex, and it's almost a cooler flex than a sports car, because more people see your digital identity than will ever see your physical vehicle, right? And so the idea of, how like the pride of ownership and actually supporting an artist early is a natural phenomenon in human behavior. Like everyone talks about being first to listen to their favorite artist before they sold out. It's natural, right? And then the other part of it is social signaling that ownership is valuable beyond that. The final piece, Jeremy, that you mentioned, and then I'll kind of end my story here, is this idea of quote unquote utility, which is a word that I rarely use, because a lot of the stuff that is exciting about tokens is just starting to work. We're like right on the edge of real world function. But the utility that does exist today is twofold. It's content and community based. So like access to exclusive Discords and unlockable content by signing messages. That stuff exists and it works well. A lot of my community in my Discord that owns some of my NFTs are extremely excited to be owners. We actually made our first royalty payment ever last Friday. And even though it was a small payment, people were just so stoked. A small payment relative to like the valuation of the song, let's call it. But that's kind of proof that royalties are just like this base layer level. And yes, like the future is access to real world events, ticketing, special communication with your favorite artist. And it goes even far beyond that. I mean, there's a world where you can even vote on and give feedback to an artist as they're making a song, right? I mean, there's so much potential in that world. And I think we're about to enter a time where that all of that functionality will be unlocked. But today at Royal, we focus on one thing. It's the one thing we're allowed to do. And it's the one thing that we're excited about, which is just giving people ownership in existing records. In the future, we'll be able to support, funding an album in advance, that there are regulatory, concerns with doing that the way that Royal is built today. And so, doing Reg CF offerings for future music is something we're exploring and really excited about. But today we're just excited that people are valuing music in an incredible way insofar as, we had two really big successes. Nas as our kind of a marquee kind of initial artist to prove that the model works. We had 176,000 people trying to buy 2,000 items,
Yep.
Which is a crazy number. And then with Verite, a small independent artist, she generated $90,000 for 39% of one song, which is not a deal she'd ever get from a record label. And so, with that, I think I can it's about halfway through. That's my story. I think. How'd I do, Jeremy?
Okay? That was awesome. Love that. I really want to just shine a light as well on, you mentioned this like social signaling aspect, and you can almost view I don't know, like say if you own like a Kanye song or something like that, that is a bigger flex right now than owning a Bored Ape or a CryptoPunk or anything like that. In many ways. So what does that like sort of next step look like? I own like a worst case token. I love the airdrop. Thank you for that a couple weeks ago. And I've been following like every kind of drop, and I know this like you guys are going to start like picking up even more. Like Chainsmokers, Kygo are involved in the round. I know, like, so I'm guessing there might be something there.
There's really big stuff in the pipeline, and we're really excited about it. Another artist, most of our investors are probably going to do stuff with us. Some other people who have invested that we haven't announced yet include everyone from Lionel Richie to Diplo to Steve Aoki to Illenium to, we have just a ton of artists that have invested that we haven't even announced yet that we're really excited about working with. And all these artists have that commonality that, establishing a deeper relationship with a fan is really powerful. And that relationship has to be limited insofar as an artist only has so much time. Right. And so there is this value premium that exists to owning something scarce that represents ownership in music. And even though my album auction back in the day didn't carry royalties with it at the time, we actually assigned it after the fact. So now each of those winners each has 1% of the album, totaling about 33% ownership in the entire album. And some of those people have used their all access pass to come backstage at EDC. And one of the auction winners who paid $300,000 to win it, said that experience being backstage at EDC was like absolutely life-changing and worth more than every penny he paid for the auction, right? And so that's kind of the value unlock that I'm most excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you kind of also hinted at some of the where music labels fit in. And I'm just curious, like, where does Royal see itself in this broader ecosystem? And is this going to be like a collaborative relationship with some of the labels? Is it more competitive in certain areas?
I think it's both. We have had some really great conversations with labels in that Royal is like a value unlock on top of everything that exists. Insofar as we may force labels to have to be more competitive with their deal structures long term.
Yeah.
But we're not helping artists with marketing and they have more tools to do that themselves today. We're just a service to help them monetize. But a lot of artists will still need label services to do certain things. And the two worlds can totally coexist in a non-mutually exclusive way. And realistically, right, if we can help a label achieve a higher multiple on their ownership and cut the artist back in, those are the deals that we're exploring. And everyone's willing to work together, which is really cool. Like, artists kind of got the short end of the stick. Now the label needs the artist buy-in and everybody wins. It's kind of interesting. That's what we're seeing. It's not really that competitive, but I do think long-term it will be, in that like maybe the next generation of artists just doesn't sign deals because they're seeing that platforms like Royal are working, and then labels need to get way more price competitive about what they're offering. And by the way, labels are extremely price competitive in the top end of the market. The deals that they send the big artists are massive because there's lower risk, but the deals they send the new artists are quite crap. And so there's going to be a rebalancing there. But I don't view it as competitive. I definitely view Royal as like the same way Audius kind of directly competes with streaming platforms. I just had a call with like the number one at Apple Music this morning, and we talked about this vision that we both shared. Apple acquired Shazam last year. You're in a coffee shop, you hear a song you like, you Shazam it. You should be able to Apple Pay and put $10 into that immediately. Yeah. Like, that's such a special experience that we think will happen. And we just kind of shared a moment on a phone call this morning. We both definitely believe in that future. And it's cool to be able to talk to these execs at these companies who really share that vision. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of to that future, actually, what is like Royal like in 3 years time, 5 years time? Like, what are some of the things that potentially you guys are able to do?
So in the beginning, it's going to be quite curated because we have to represent like artists that come and sell. So there's a lot here to think about where it is in 3 years. So there's one thing that we do that's different than everyone else. We haven't really published this yet, but I'm publishing a blog about it like in the next week. I ran into a lot of IP. I ran into an IP clusterfuck after my auction, as you can imagine. And I worked with some of the best IP lawyers and around, like external counsel to Apple on a lot of stuff to figure out what to do. And I learned a lot. I almost feel like I got a law degree, even though I didn't. What we figured out was selling rights in a song and selling visual art that represents those rights doesn't require you to get clearance from any other participants on a song. But the second you upload the audio and exploit the audio file, and let's say like the NFT metadata points to the audio file on IPFS or Arweave or whatever the hell it is, the second you do that, you need to get clearance from all participants on the song. But if you just own 30% of the song, in off-chain world, you can do whatever you want with that. You can also make art and sell it. We take that really interesting approach where like our tokens don't point to the audio because that won't scale. Should more artists want to tokenize music, it's impossible to tokenize the audio without getting clearance from all parties. And that, I will tell you from personal experience, doesn't work and is an absolute nightmare. So in building the kind of architecture of an LDA, of a limited digital asset, which is what we call them at Royal, because we think NFT is not really that descriptive, in architecting what that looked like, we wanted to build something that could scale to any artist who wanted to use our product. And unfortunately, if the audio is linked to the token, an artist would need to get certain clearances that would be a very big pain in the ass for them. And so getting to where's Royal in 3 years, because we've architected the assets this way, we believe it's optimizing for scale insofar as 3 years from now, we want people to be able to audit, but have an open platform of artists that can sell whatever they want, but audit that those artists actually maintain those rights. And so unfortunately with Royal, as compared to a lot of other platforms, there are always going to be kind of legacy legal and Web2 dependencies that exist. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, that's just the nature of the music business. And it's going to take a long time for that to change. And we have to kind of be cognizant of that bridge the way Coinbase was with fiat off-ramp, on-ramp, right? So there are Web2 points of failure that exist at Royal, but it is the way the music business works, and we're dependent on that, at least for the next 3 years. I think after that, things will start to change. So in 3 years' time, I guess, my vision is like any artist can come to Royal and sell their music as art.
Yeah. So essentially Royal right now like sits in the middle here. You have your LDA that's on chain, and then you have the actual kind of, music digital asset, which has to live off chain. And Royal is that kind of like connector.
In a sense, I guess you have the rights that live off chain, right? Because you can't, like, the biggest, and you guys all know this, but there's so many misconceptions about like what is reality and what is technically possible. People still think smart contracts are legal agreements. Like, I have to explain this to people on a phone call. They're like, so the smart contract splits the income. And I'm like, yes, it splits it, but it's not a legal agreement that's recognized by the US government. In fact, you can't, like, text would be just in the comment section of a fucking smart contract, right? So like, I have to explain this to people because people think that a smart contract is actually a legal agreement in the music world, right? Instead of just a set of rules that tokens follow on chain. And that's exactly right though, Jeremy. Like we are in many ways a bridge. Like we serve to be both an educational and product focused bridge between the music world and Web3. Yeah. But it's hard. It's definitely hard.
And I guess like with that, you could also see a world where, if this does evolve and, some of these legacy components like leave, that digital asset that's currently living off chain could, be on an L2, or something like that. And like, Royal could maintain that position as that bridge, which could be super exciting.
I think that there's going to be, like, if I wanted to go really deep in the future, right? Like every artist has a digital identity and signature. And when like a song is made, the splits are like, instead of there ever being an actual legal agreement, you like literally sign a message confirming the splits, like with your other participants on the song. And then at that point, all the revenue is happening on chain. It's not happening off chain with Web2 services like Spotify. Like people are paying per stream with a platform like Audius, and everything just flows and happens on chain. Like I do think that's possible, but like there are so many variables in the chain of not, in the chain process where like you need to establish artist identity. You need to establish rights at a certain point in the song's creation. The song then needs to live only in the Web3 world, not in the Web2 world, so that you don't have to bridge, fiat income to royalty payments, which is in and of itself a massive challenge, especially for artists that don't know anything about crypto, right? So like the future is really bright. Like I think we can all here in this room envision what that looks like. We'll get there. Like I'm very confident we'll get there. It's just in the short term. And I think Royal wants to support all that in the future, right? I think we're going to hopefully grow really quickly and hopefully be able to support all that.
Awesome. I'll open this up to the audience. I know we have a couple of hands already up. Tandy, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Jeremy. Justin, first of all, I'll introduce myself. So Nick Tandy was chief of staff to the CEO at AWOL and Cobalt. So quite familiar with you and your music, quite familiar with the music industry. Also was one of the people that got to buy into the Nas NFT drop, so that was awesome. And I know Anthony.
Sorry, the user experience wasn't perfect. It was our first one.
Listen, I completely understand. I'm like, I was, supporting you guys in the Discord because like fans are like asking questions, and I'm like, look, this is the first drop. It's like this is a part of history. And the last one I was going to say is like Keith Raboy actually told me that he was working on something which ended up being Royal before. I had no idea he was such a big music fan. And so he said he was working with some electronic DJ, and I was like, there's only a handful who might be doing stuff in this space, so I can probably figure out who it is. So hats off to you, man.
Yeah, Keith's been a friend to me through JD for years. So
yeah. So question. So obviously, like the biggest unlock is like right now you've been working with artists that like Verite, who's like awesome and familiar with from being on AWOL, artists that are largely independent. The biggest unlock is like being able to release some of the records that currently sit with a lot of the major labels. And you alluded to that earlier. Like, I know you talked about like being able to get like a higher multiple return for them. Like, how do you, like, given the conversations you've had with some of these execs with the major labels, like, what do you think it's going to take in order to get them to start to play ball and experiment with this space?
The hour before this call was all about that. Some of it I can't really talk about, but I will say this. A lot of them are willing and able to play. I do think that Royal particularly will benefit over time the next generation of artists more than existing artists. Unfortunately, it's just the nature of how economics are changing. But let's just say one of our investors is going to give away ownership in an album that is on a major label. It is going to be a small amount of ownership that probably will generate relatively insignificant royalties, but they are going to be giving it away. And what everyone is excited about is the idea of secondary market royalties and other types of appreciation that might exist. Now, we all know that ERC 721 doesn't enforce that. And we have that dependency on centralized marketplaces to enforce, the idea of secondary commissions. I don't like calling them royalties because they're not. They're really secondary commissions. That said, I think a lot of the major label players are quite excited about the possibility of generating recurring income from these things trading back and forth over time, especially as songs grow in popularity and become massive hits. That excites them a lot. And they're mostly willing to cut artists back in, but they are the controllers. So our priority is working with both like artists that have flexibility there. I will also say there are lots of large artists that are coming out of their deals.
Yeah.
Now, this is where, Drake or Post Malone, or Calvin or whoever it is, they have really interesting incentives with labels in that they've already had a lot of music that's successful. The label owns a lot of it. And the label will basically go to these artists and say, here's $100 million or more. I'm going to own the next 5 albums. And the artist really has for the rest of their life, they take the 100 million and they like, maybe they make the music, maybe they don't, but they can't do anything, right? Like they're kind of stuck in a label approving every aspect of their career. But a lot of the major artists like Drake and Post Malone, they do that. And honestly, I understand why. They're like de-risking their own popularity in a sense, right? And getting to live life to the fullest. I guess I would challenge the question in that I don't know if those artists are the biggest value unlock. I think they are the most popular. But there are a lot of popular artists that like, they might not be the biggest in the world, but having a loyal following in many ways means more than streaming a ton. And this is a conversation we have internally at the company all the time. You know, Rufus Du Sol is a great example of artists that we're working with. I'm sure most of you guys know their music. I'm close friends with them, with their manager, Danny, at least. I actually only met one of the guys. We had a really good time. We played a show together in St. Martin. They love this stuff. They're in a 50-50 deal. They can sell 25%. But let's be honest, like how many loyal Rufus fans are there relative to, let's call it like fans that would want to own a Carly Rae Jepsen song, right? Or like someone who's had a major pop hit. I believe that a lot of the value unlock will not necessarily happen at the top. It'll happen in the middle. It'll happen with the artists that have like the insane loyal followers who really want to own the music, who have that special connection to the music. And just because something is popular doesn't necessarily mean the depth of the connection is there. And so our thesis is very much that our best and most successful artists are going to be the ones who sell the most tickets. And those aren't always the ones that are the most popular. And Rufus Du Sol is one of the highest ticket selling acts in America. And like that's just an example of, you know, how do you evaluate the value of music? Is it just the stream count or is there something deeper?
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And it's kind of like it helps to grow the market for these individuals that are like big touring acts, not necessarily big streaming acts per se. I was more so thinking about it from the context of how do you unlock like just market, like overall market value,
market supply,
right? Like,
right, exactly. And that's right. So 100%. I think like we think about it on two ends of the spectrum, right? Most of the supply that exists is tied up. We probably have to unlock some of that. We're talking to some of the P like Hypnosis and KKR, and like everybody wants to figure this out. We still think that when it comes from the artist, it's more powerful than just owning the song. That's still our thesis today. We're willing to be proven otherwise. The other piece of the puzzle that I just want to mention is, I haven't even said this yet in the conversation, but when a fan owns a piece of a song, their incentives are so much more aligned with that artist. How much more likely are they to share it with everybody and really champion that artist? That's like the kind of behavior that we're really excited about for an up and comer. Whereas for an established artist, we're not like, that behavior will exist. But like if you invest in a Drake song, like let's be real, your return is going to be like, you're not going to see upside. He's the biggest artist, one of the biggest streaming artists in the world. Where we see the real opportunity, like right now people are excited about owning popular music, but we really see the opportunity in the artists that are like just getting big or already have really loyal followings. And like, yes, that's not the highest supply unlock, but we think it's highest impact short term. And then long term, we think the labels will kind of, they're already, really, amicable to the idea of cutting the artist back in.
Got you. Very cool. I think that the futures and like the role that fans play by owning a song that is not yet released and the impact they can have as influencers to help evangelize that song. I think all of that's really cool. But thanks, Justin. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, for sure. I see some questions in the chat. Matt King.
Yeah. Matt, Justin.
So we're talking to Warner. I don't know what a deal is. I don't know like what a deal structure would look like with a label. We actually just talked about this. I don't like shitting on my competitors, but like there's only one competitor that I actually think is doing a really great job, and that's Sound. And I know the founder pretty well. They're going just for the collectible front. They will have issues scaling with IP concerns because you can't just tokenize audio all the time when there's a participant. But I don't feel very much. We are the only platform that's doing rights specific NFTs, and I should say there is one other. It's Republic and Opulus. Most people don't know this, but I modeled their entire structure and was going to work with them prior to creating Royal, and then realized that we didn't need some of that back end from talking to Keith about it. There's like a lot of history there. But yeah, look, I don't really think of, what we're doing is substantially different in that, like, we're giving owners of these tokens true ownership in the song as opposed to just collectible ownership. And I think that's just what distinguishes us. If that's a good answer, Matt.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you.
Dominic, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And Justin, big fan of you and your brother. Faces was actually my first NFT, so I've always felt a connection there.
Dude, well, Dominic, if Faces is your first, let's see how many days you got. In 9 days, the song is actually going to be released everywhere. And everyone, I don't know if you saw this, but I'm giving 100% of the ownership to the original, whoever owns the tokens. And we actually already have like a licensing deal that we're negotiating for all 4 of the songs that were a part of that drop. So that's like really, really exciting. That's a little secret, but it's fun. So yeah. Anyway, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah, no, just curious about your view of how just blockchain generally is going to change the overall music landscape just generally for producers. So one of the anecdotes that I've heard is it's really difficult to clear samples. So there'll be all these great songs that are kind of stuck in limbo because they can't be released. Is there some kind of blockchainized solution that could help producers kind of track those samples and release those songs?
Fun story to that point. Everyone knows the Wu-Tang album that was sold. The reason why it was sold that way is because they didn't have clearance on a lot of the samples that were used. That's why it was never released publicly and auctioned instead. Fun fact. When you get granular to the sample and like producers and stuff, the time horizon on that, like, is it possible? Yes. There's one issue. There's a company called Arpeggi that I also invested in that I'm really excited about that stores sample data in like audio sample data in byte data in transactions, which is cheaper to publish it on chain. We're really far away from like assigning sounds and clearances with IDs. Like that just feels, it's a huge, like you basically would have to kind of create music that directly talks to an on-chain database or oracle of sorts, like while you're making it. It's, for that to work, like in theory, it's really, really interesting. I think we're really far away from that, but I could be wrong. If that's a good answer.
Thanks.
I think it's really hard to track samples, like in general. This is why like Spotify wanted to integrate mashups with like with an algorithm that scraped for like what songs were used and like set a pro rata share of the income to each different rights holder, and like that never happened. It's just like hard. Like then when you get really granular with that and then putting it on chain, like Jesus, it's like a big challenge.
Cool. Thanks.
Nick.
Hey, Justin, thanks for being here. I had a quick question around like royalties and securities law. It seems like a lot of NFT projects that want to give away or sell ownership for IP that has royalty streams attached has run into some securities regulations issues. It sounds like you guys are comfortable
My favorite.
that have been like created already because it sneaks by potentially, but not those that haven't been created, but you see that as part of the future. I'm wondering if you have any visibility in sort of these applications in the creator economy when it comes to securities laws and potential guidance coming forward.
So I'm lucky that Keith is a great securities lawyer and one of our lead investors, and was kind enough to introduce us to Jay Clayton, who's the former chair of the SEC, who we've spoken to 4 times. We've spoken to Bill Hinman twice. We've spoken to a lot of really, really cool people. It's honestly, it's I also think the most fun that I have working at this, building this company is the legal side, because everything in Web3 challenges, like whether it be DAO tokens or NFTs that have royalties associated, they all challenge like everything in the existing legal framework of thinking about rights and ownership. Without like actually being able to tell you, some of the privileged and confidential research that we're doing, we're insanely confident in our approach that we're taking. I can't say the same of everyone. There's a reason why crowdfunding music is a different product that we haven't built yet. We think that an artist that hasn't completed the music to give you like a, without going too deep into it, completed music is not treated, like rights in completed music is not treated as a security in the off-chain world today. People can go and trade those rights without accreditation. In most cases, it's not a very widely active activity because like there isn't really a good marketplace for it. That's kind of what we're excited about, building that marketplace for those rights, plus the emotional value of ownership that we were kind of discussing before. But when it comes to non-existing music, we need to build a separate product for that that's compliant, and we haven't done that yet. And without getting too deep there, it's contingent upon the efforts of the issuer. So like if you own a song of mine and I unfortunately pass away tomorrow, legally you still own it. There's no efforts required of me to get that to you. There's an administrator that does that. If I'm required to like perform a service or work to make you money, it probably passes the Howey test. And then there's other types of securities. Everyone talks about the Howey, but like there's like tons of other things aside from Howey test that you got to think about. But yeah, we're really like, that's like one of the most fun parts of what I do is like that analysis. Unfortunately, I can't share all of it, but like it's exciting and fun. And there's like, it's the Wild West. It's the Wild West.
Got it. Thanks.
Jacob, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you, Justin. I really appreciate all of this. Quick question for you. So was wondering what your views are on models in the Web3 music space that are based on digital assets around the music, things like works in progress, behind the scenes content, stuff like that isn't the masters or ownership in the actual rights and royalties, but may have value to certain fans.
Yeah, so that's a really, really good one. Like accessing exclusive content can be token gated, which is cool. I don't know, I think that people care about it. I think that they will care about it at scale as like more people start to do stuff like that for their token holders who create these ecosystems. It's hard to ascribe a value to like listening to unfinished music in a digital space versus like having a like going and listening to something with your favorite artist in a physical space. I think that like some VR and metaverse applications might change that a little bit, but we're by the way, we're like 1000% thinking about all this stuff. It is hard to say though, like what other ancillary things have value. And I think we'll let the market kind of decide, and we'll let artists kind of experiment with that. Like our job at Royal is to give artists a tool, but I think artists will get really creative in figuring out like what their fans care about. And I do think it will depend on the fans. But it's a great question. I mean, there's so much potential to build token gated stuff, token gated everything. You can token gate literally anything. So it'll be fun to see artists experiment.
Thank you.
I see somebody says, is there space in the round? Unfortunately not. I wish there was. That's the number one question that I get from everyone. But we will, that's actually,
come on, we're value add.
I totally agree that you are. I think that if it weren't for the regulatory environment, I would love a world where like Royal was completely, built from the ground up, fan owned, decentralized, all that fun stuff. Because we're dealing with IP. If we weren't dealing with IP, we that would change a lot of things. But we are, so we just have to unfortunately lean into that. I'm just reading the comment section here. Well, getting involved as a developer, yes, I would say that was like one of the reasons I was super stoked to talk to all of you. We are definitely hiring a lot of people. So if you are interested, I would shoot. Let me think of the right email. And Jeremy, I'll communicate that email. Like if you're interested in working at Royal, we should definitely I'll give you the right email to. It's Alex Treister on our hiring team. She'd be the point of contact. But Jeremy, yeah, shoot me a note on email after, and I'll make sure to connect any of you who are interested in coming to join the team.
And what kind of roles are you hiring for? Obviously engineers, but just curious for some of the non-engineers.
Everything. We're growing so insanely fast. We have 750,000 non-bot unique users, which is an insane number. And the traffic, as you guys know, is in the hundreds of thousands every time we do something. So yeah, it's we got a lot to do. would love to chat with some of you. I mean, we have the brightest minds, brightest future minds. We'd love for you to come work with us. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, we've got a good group here, like from the Blockchain Club, but also from the GSB. So some non-tech folks here too, who are super excited about this space.
Yeah, I think anyone over there is probably high value add. I totally agree, Matt. I think that was you who said that, but.
So if I heard like JD kind of mention like Royal, like almost as like a Web 2.5 platform in a way, right? Like
that's what we say. That's what we say. Yeah.
Like to bring on this, like, this next generation of, current non-crypto users, but, music is such an obvious gateway to the crypto ecosystem in a way. So what are some of the ways for the less crypto folks, to kind of get involved with Royal, whether that's sort of, to buy an LDA, to kind of get on board.
So we've developed, this is a great question, Jeremy. So like, we're so proud of this backend system that we developed. And that's why partially we crashed and why like the experience hasn't been perfect. We really believe that when you come to Royal, you should be able to buy an asset without owning crypto. We want to be the hand-holding guide to bring you into the ecosystem without friction, abstracting most of the complicated shit from the get-go. So what we do, if you pay with credit card and you don't connect your wallet, we generate a wallet for you that's non-custodial. It's really unique. No one else is doing this today. Nifty Gateway has a custodial wallet. So like when you go and pay with credit card, they still own your asset. The second we transfer, so we mint in a centralized way because we want to block gas wars and botting.
Yep.
We have to do that. But the second you get transferred your asset, we want you to have full control over it. That's both for compliance and for like, ethos reasons. And that system of like our backend communicating with like, and my engineers could speak better. By the way, I have no engineering experience. My little brother's a genius engineer and he teaches me everything. But our backend is pretty complex to have like credit card processing, communicating with on-chain payments, communicating with transfers, communicating with wallet generation for new users. There's a lot of variables that play on the back end. That we think like you said, we want it to be frictionless for somebody to be able to own music, and however involved they want to get in Web3 after, they can. What's interesting is like, let's say they do get something exclusive, they look at the secondary market and then they're immediately like, how do I figure out how to participate? And they start learning, right? Like when you wave money in front of somebody, you just make them have to like walk a couple of feet. They're probably going to walk and pick it up. But putting that up front for UX, like MetaMask onboarding UX is horrendous. And, Coinbase's NFT platform, I'm sure, is going to correct some of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I'm really excited for the mainstream to get involved. Like we only have 1 million active users on OpenSea, and I'm an early OpenSea investor. So like I'm like huge fans of those guys and really, really excited to see their progress. There has to be an unlock for the rest of the world. And I think there's two things. It's like, how do you get somebody to really own something with low effort is like principle number one. Principle number two is you've got a lot of people out there that are willing to pay $10 for something. If $10 is your minimum gas fee, you're blocking out so much of the demand curve for any of these assets. And that's our other kind of product principle that we really stand by. It's like easy onboarding, accessible pricing. Those are the two things that we think the space is lacking today to onboard the mainstream.
Yeah, I've noticed for the NUS one, you guys are like doing on Polygon and stuff, which seemed like a no-brainer, for that kind of quantity.
Yeah, and we did worst case on mainnet, but like when we go to make royalty payments, like we did it in ETH instead of in USDC, and because of the just expense. Like there's just so many variables on cost structure. I'm quite optimistic on ZK Sync. I think that a lot of this stuff will probably run on a ZK layer 2, the stuff that we're building at least. And I think optimistic rollups will mostly apply to DeFi applications, and like you obviously have this like token ID advance issue with bridging there. We could talk about that stuff forever, but again, I'm not an engineer. I'm just friends with a lot of them, and I hear their feedback and I try to distill it for our product vision.
No, I completely agree with that. I think Matter Labs are crushing it with ZK Sync, and it's so exciting. And I totally agree that like I think optimism, with the 7-day finality thing, it's probably it's not going to work necessarally for the music.
Not for
stuff,
unique
but,
IDs. It works for fungible. It works for fungible tokens where you can have a counterparty or someone advance it, right? But like, I don't, I mean, if everything just, there's a lot, we could talk forever about that stuff. Like I am optimistic on Solana, but then like Evan Chang, who's like one of the DM developers who's become a friend of mine, is like highlighting all the stuff, like all the DDoS problems that exist there. Like there's just, it's so new, guys. And it's I think that's what makes it so exciting.
Absolutely. And you actually just quickly mentioned your brother. So I'm just going to drop his name in here. So Michael Blau, who's an awesome engineer at Andreessen, launched this amazing NFT collection called MEV Army. And it's equal parts kind of community driven, educational. So if any of you guys are looking for kind of an entry level, NFT project to join, highly recommend that.
Yeah. And it's not to shill, but he's a slow builder, but when he delivers. That's his style. So I'm really excited for him to launch the next round of features. And yeah, I think in general, a lot of the public, some of the behavior that's happening is not healthy. I think we all know that. And there are some really great actors. There are some really bad actors. And, one of my biggest fears, to close, I know that there's sure there's a lot of stuff, but one of my biggest fears is that a lot of these, more opportunistic players give this stuff a bad name the same way it kind of happened, in 2017, but this would be at a way larger scale when it does collapse, if it does collapse. And so I always like to, you guys don't need this, but whenever I'm on Twitter Spaces and talking to people, I'm just kind of please don't think of this stuff as investments. Think about it as your participation, your ticket to participate in a community that you think you'll get value out of, emotionally and, intellectually. I don't think everybody follows that rule, but I think there's a lot of dangerous stuff out there too.
Justin, I want to be so respectful of your time. Thank you so much for coming in. This was an amazing discussion. I can't wait to see what Royal does next. And I hope a bunch of Stanford folks end up joining Royal.
I would
love
that
vision with you
to happen. We will I'll definitely give you an email on our side. We'd love, you guys have unique perspective. Let's be honest. There aren't that many, you guys are the next generation of engineers and leaders in this space. It's been proven time and time again. So we'd love to chat.
Cool. Thanks again. See you soon.
Thanks everyone.